they had polls. Sorry, I'm just getting strange meetings over my screen about the recording. Yeah, they did research every year or so to see what the most popular birding destinations in the UK were. And it was always a toss-up as to whether North Norfolk or the Scottish Highlands came in first place. One year it'd be one year it'd be the other, with Devon and Cornwall trailing in quite a way behind in third place. The editor of the magazine, David Cromack, decided to leave and take over Buckingham Press, a publishing company. It publishes the Birdwatchers Yearbook every year, but he wanted to do some site guides, where to watch guides as well. And if you've never come across the concept of a where to watch guide, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It tells you where are the best places to go birding and what birds you see when you get there. Now, obviously, it would have been a lot easier as I live in Norfolk, if I'd been given a Norfolk book, but he'd already assigned that to somebody else. But he did ask me, would I be interested in doing a book on the Scottish Highlands? And I immediately said yes, without thinking about it in the slightest. So the first thing was, let's sit down and start thinking about what I actually wanted to put into the book in the first place. Obviously, there are going to be all the iconic Scottish species, golden eagle, capercaillie, although perversely they are now under so much pressure that professional tour guides up in Scotland, we won't take people out to go looking for the cappers anymore. They really are under a lot of pressure, and there's a fair chance they're going to go extinct for the third time in the next 10, 20 years or so. But apart from all the birds, there are other things I wanted to include. If I was writing the book for myself, I thought, what else would I like to see? And I'd like to know if a place was a good place to go and see otters. Or if I was really lucky, pine martens. If I was really, really lucky, I might find one of the elusive wildcats. There was all the Scottish scenery to take into consideration. This is Torridon over on the west coast, and it sort of exemplifies what most people expect from Scotland. You've got a snow-capped mountain, beautifully reflected in a perfectly still loch. You've got a nice bit of moorland along the edge of it, and you've got some woodland there to complete the habitats. But there are other habitats too. The Caledonian pine forests are wonderful. But it's not the trees that struck me. The trees are great, and you can go and have them all day long. But it's the understory that absolutely fascinates. And as you walk through the woods, somewhere like Abernethy, the understory seems to change every 10 yards or so. There's always something different to look at. It's sort of like a Brucey bonus. You get 2 habitats for the price of 1. Then there are all the seabird colonies. This is Duncansby Head up in Caithness. And one of the things we found out later was that seabird colonies are really popular with any visitors coming from the continent. There aren't many cliffs in Holland, Germany, and they can't wait to come and see the magnificent numbers of breeding seabirds that we've got. History played a part too. Anybody who did Shakespeare at school, this is Cawdor Castle, features heavily Macbeth. The last battle on British soil at Culloden took place just outside Inverness, 1746. And a couple of characters kept cropping up during my research. This one is known as the Wolf of Badenoch. And if you ever wrote an entry in Who's Who under hobbies, I think he would be listing tearing down cathedrals. He was an outlaw, and he lived in this ruined castle, which is in Lochindorb, just north of Grantown Spey. And this is a place where birders usually go on their first day because it's not very far from their hotel or their guest house to go and have a look for black-throated divers and red grouse and raptors over the moors and what have you. But he kept cropping up everywhere I went. He seemed to have been several hundred years before. The other character who kept popping up was the Brahman seer, who was a sort of Nostradamus or Mystic Meg of his day. And with all these seers, it's very easy to interpret his prophecies with the benefit of hindsight and make the facts sort of fit his proclamations. This is Loch Eriboll, right up on the very north coast of Scotland. And the Brahman seer is reputed to have said that a major sea battle is going to finish here. And sure enough, in 1945, this is where the German U-boat fleet surrendered, because it's one of the few locks that's deep enough to take them all. From birdwatching point of view, it's one of the best places in Britain to see anything up to 100 summer plumage great northern divers. They start arriving in autumn, and there are usually quite a few lingering through into May. Spectacular birds, and especially when you're seeing them, 50, 60, 70 at a time. This is Shannon Point, Black Isle, and the memorial here is to the Brahman seer. We'll go there to watch the dolphins and the seabirds, but they want to remember him in their own peculiar way. Apparently, his lord and master had gone off to France for whatever reason, and his wife asked the Brahman seer one night, "How is my husband? Is he safe and well?" And he said, "Oh yes, he's very well, my lady, lying in the arms of a beautiful young." This didn't go down very well, and his punishment was they put him in a barrel, they filled the barrel full of tar, they hammered spikes into the barrel, set fire to the tar, and rolled him down the hill. And where the barrel stopped and where he died, this is where the memorial is. The Scots are absolutely brilliant at coming up with cruel and unusual punishments. Whisky, Scotland's main export, and there are any numbers of distilleries that have tours and might provide you with a dram or two should you venture within their confines. And again, if you're driving past, this is something else that you might want to consider if you don't want to go birding all day long. Myth and the land of fairy is still very big in Scotland, especially over on Skye. The MacLeod clan are very heavily into fairy folk. And it's not just Loch Ness that has its own monster. Loch Shiel has Sheelag, Loch Moor has Morag. They're not very imaginative when it comes to naming names. And as you go down a size in lochs, the smaller lochs have kelpies, which are these sort of water horses, malevolent, evil spirits. I'm interested in trivia too, and I wanted to include some of that. There's the Green Loch near Cairngorms, and apparently the colour of that, and it really is bright green, is because that's where all the fairy folk go at night to wash their clothes, and that gives it a strange hue. Glenelg on the west coast, where there's still a ferry over to Skye, apparently the only palindromic name in Scotland. The Mar Lodge estate in Deeside, on one of the hills there's supposed to be a cairn marking the absolute dead centre of Scotland. The only trouble is nobody knows where it is. So I knew what I wanted to put in, and I know that the Highlands are special. Anybody who goes up there has a fantastic time. But I couldn't put my finger on what makes the Highlands so special. Everything I tried, it just wasn't working. You think, yeah, it's all right, but it's not what I wanted. I could do better. I knew I could do better. And so I had to keep on looking. And as is always the case with these things, I got bored and I started remembering some of the things that we'd seen up there. And it could be something simple like grey wagtail taking caddisfly larvae in to feed its young. I remembered seeing a male redstart, Inch Marshes, and there's a lookout tower there, sadly burnt down at the moment. But the redstart flew underneath us, so we actually got to look down on its beautiful starlet tail. Start is the old name for tail, and it really does have a red tail. But that was an angle very few people must have been able to see. I remember the holiday up in Sutherland, and I don't think we got out of the car once in the entire week without hearing cuckoos all over the place, including on the coast. We had one flock of 10 or 12 that was still migrating through. Scottish owls, my favourite owl. We see them here in Norfolk, hunting in salt marshes in winter, but there's something special when they're in the right habitat, and I love seeing them quartering over the moorland. It just gives that extra little edge to them. Long-tailed ducks with their strange yodeling calls, these great big spaniel ears. Again, numbers have declined massively in recent years. We think it's because the mussel beds are getting worked out. The numbers are down from thousands to hundreds, and they're getting fewer and fewer, but there are still plenty up there. They always strike me as looking like photographic negatives when they fly past you. Everything you think should be black or brown is white, and vice versa. I remember being at Ardnamurchan on the west coast, the most westerly point of the British mainland, and just watching thousands and thousands of Manx shearwaters going past. Already mentioned Shannery Points, and yes, the views of dolphins really can be that good. There one day, and the dolphins were showing well, and I had a flock of 9 red-throated divers fly low over our head. I was the only one who bothered watching them. Everyone else was just entranced with our cetacean friends. Typical summer's day over in the Highlands. It's not really. The weather's not as bad. I've had, I think, 1 week of solid rain in 35 years of going, and that's been it. This beastie was taken on the Isle of Mull, and originally we weren't going to include Mull in the book, but because everybody had such a fantastic time when they went there, my editor said, no, you must put something in Mull there. So we went over one autumn, and the cottage we were staying in was great, and the red deer were rutting right outside the cottage. Unfortunately, the books don't tell you that red deer don't come with an off switch. So 10 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so it went on all day, every day, for the entire week. They lose a bit of their appeal after that. As I say, everybody has magic moments on Mull. And one of ours came, we were driving around one day, a Merlin shot over the bonnet of the car. Quickly ground to a halt, and I'm caught out for Chris. I said, he's flying along that stone wall, still going, he's coming up to that big oak tree. Now, still going along the stone wall, still going, coming up to the top of the hill. Gone. Actually wasn't what I said. I gave you a perfect description of where that bird was. But he couldn't even be bothered looking at it. And she said, no, look. And in front of us, there were 3 adult seagulls, just flying round and round in circles. Again, only a couple of 100 feet up in the air, right in front of us. So I let her off on that occasion. And eventually it occurred to me that what I was looking for was, I've got to make sure that whoever goes up there and uses the book has some magic moments. As Burt Bacharach Hal David wrote in the song, magic moments, memories we've been sharing. And one of the things that occurred to me was that, okay, if you go to Loch Garden, with quite a few people that are walking at the Osprey Fire, but if you go off and go into the hinterland, whatever you see, it's just you and the wildlife, and the memories become that much more intense. So I had to find a way that I could create as many magic moments as I possibly could. But there was a big problem there. If you've seen any other Where to Watch guide in Norfolk, That's where I live. It's easy. You start off, you say you go to Holme, these are the birds you see. You go to Titchwell, you'll see A, B, and C. You go to Holcombe, you go to Wells, you go to Clyde, you go to Salthouse, you go to the Broads, and it's easy to fit into a book. But this just didn't work up in the Highlands. If you see a golden eagle in a valley one day, and you go back the next day, it could be 15, 20 miles further down the valley. There's no one place you can take people to. And I thought, no, I can't just say these are the reserves, because the Highlands is one big reserve. And so I had to find a way of getting around that. And came up with the idea of presenting the book as a series of tours. These would be a suggested day trip. I'd give you a route to follow, and it would take you to all the best places on that route to watch wildlife. It would include all the best drive, the best scenery and viewpoints, other points of interest if there were castles or distilleries or whatever. And any additional information, you know, where the petrol stations were, where are the loos, what's disabled access like, and what have you. And suddenly it all started to come together. And I could see that if I did it this way, I could actually produce something that would, yes, it would be different from the traditional where to watch guide, but it would actually all fall into place. And I should be able to help anybody using the book sort of catch up with some magic moments that they're going to go back on the Monday after the holiday, go into the office, and say, it was brilliant, guess what we saw? The only trouble was, as I say, nobody's done anything like this before. So I went to the publishers and said, look, hear me out, I've got an idea, you might not like it, and it's different. And I explained to them what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And we ummed and ahed, and we threw a few things backwards and forwards, and they weren't happy to start with because they say nobody's done this. But we talked them round to it, and eventually they said, okay, yeah, we'll buy that, let's go for it. And the philosophy that we agreed on was that even if you don't see a single bird all day, you'd still have had a great day out, and everything on top of that is a bonus. And I managed to sell that, and so we all went away and we thought, that sounds great, we'll go and do that. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot as it turns out, there were problems with designing the book, there were problems with the birds themselves, and there were all sorts of logistical problems. I'm going to have a quick look at each of those in turn. The design issues. The main problem was the maps. Again, going back to the Norfolk book, if you're writing a chapter on Titchwell, map of Titchwell fits nicely, top of page 1, forget it, over and done with. Most of my tours were circular and sort of took up a large chunk of a double page spread. But just to make it difficult for the designers, there was differences in scale. Some of the tours were only 10, 15 miles long, others were 250 miles long. And Hilary, the wife of David Cromack, the publisher, was designing everything, and she was having nightmares. And just to thread a few extra bits, I'd make the odd tour linear, or I'd have a circular tour, but there'll be a little detour on the way. And she was waking up in the middle of the night, having absolute nightmares about designing the maps. Now, fair dues, she did an absolutely brilliant job on it. And anybody who ever sees a copy of the book, it's not my writing that sells it, it's the maps, which are absolutely fantastic. But there was a feeling coming along that the whole book was jinxed. You know, there were problems along the way with whatever we tried to do. In the same way that actors will not say the name of the Scottish play because they're superstitious and what have you. So we decided, as a bit of a joke, it started as a bit of a joke, that we would not say the name of the book. It would just be called The Scottish Book, in the same way as Macbeth called The Scottish Play. And it started out as a joke, and I say, the book did seem to have something about it that was a little bit jinked. You'll see from the start of this, the name of this talk is Molotovs and Merlins. And I was giving this talk up the Grant Arms Hotel in Grantown on Spey. The hotel is geared up for wildlife, and they'd invited me up to come and give a talk, lead a walk, and what have you. And a few of the guests came up to me and they said, "That's an interesting sounding talk you're giving tonight, Gordon. Thank you very much. I hope to keep you intrigued, as I know Neil was intrigued, hasn't got a clue what's coming up yet." And then somebody else said, "That sounds interesting tonight." And you could almost see the inverted commas around interesting. And I thought, well, this doesn't normally happen when I give the talk. So I went to see what had happened. And they'd advertised the talk as Molotovs and Merlins instead of Molotovs and Merlins. And see the staff said, "What have you done? You put Molotovs instead of Molotovs." He said, "Well, we did wonder, we looked up Motolov, and he said there's no such word. Do you mean Molotov? And we looked at Molotov, and he said Russian foreign minister, and he said also a name given to petrol bombs. So, and we thought that couldn't possibly be in your talk, so we decided it must have been Motolovs, and it must be an old Scottish word for some local speciality. So I ended up having to give a talk all about Molotovs and Merlins instead. I wanted to put in a dedication to Chris. She'd done all the hard work while I was up taking notes and watching the birds. She was driving me around and finding the birds for me. I did a fantastic job. I couldn't have done it without her. So, but right, I want to do something, but I don't want her to know about it. So I got in touch with the publisher and said, "Look, do you mind if I just put a dedication to Chris?" And he said, "Oh, no problem at all." So we pulled round to their house one day for the final proofreading session. And Hilary divvied up piles of the chapters, some for you, some for you, some for me, what have you. And sure enough, Chris got the very first package, and there on the first page was a flipping dedication to her, which she'd not seen before. So she's in floods of tears. After the book is published, we round at some friends, and they pick up on the fact that there's a dedication there, and they say, "Oh, that's nice, I like that, isn't that sweet?" And when we went to bed that night, we heard them in the next room arguing. "You've never done anything like that for me," the wife said. "Oh, I would have done," said the husband. "I've not actually written a book." It didn't go down well, and my only tip is, gentlemen, if you're in a hole, stop digging. So I started out trying to do something really nice for somebody, and it ended up with my wife in floods of tears and our best friends on the verge of the divorce court. As I say, we'd gone around there to do the proofreading. I find it very difficult to proofread my own work because I know what I meant to write, and when I went through it, my brain automatically corrects for what it thought I should have written. And I'd give pages to Chris and say, "Right, this one's fine, just check it." And she'd suddenly come up with a dozen errors that my brain has just sort of auto-corrected and gone past. But we got there in the end, and we got it all done. And the moment comes when the book arrives, and you sit down, and it seems to be tradition that as soon as you open your book, at the very first page you open it up, there's a typo. And sure enough, it happened to me. One of the maps was annotated. "This is a good place to see mountain hares." That's what he should have said. What it actually said was, "This is a good place for mountain hare." Now, in fairness, this was a change that had been put in after we had passed the book off, so it wasn't my fault. But as the author, I'm the one that takes all the flack for it. I've been writing for birdwatching and editing for them for over 30 years now, and even they're not immune from this jinx. When the second edition of the book came out, they got their copy to review, and I'm not the sort of person who says, "Oh, come on, I'll scratch my back, you scratch mine," and what have you. I didn't expect a good review. Just have a look at it and say what you think on its merits. That's fine. And they did, and they said some very nice things about it. And then they went and ruined it all by putting in a picture of the first edition instead of the second edition. As I say, the book was jinxed. There are problems with the birds as well. This is a ptarmigan in winter plumage, and as you can see, it doesn't take an awful lot if the bird sits down in the snow. You're not going to find that very easily at all. Now, in fairness to the bird, it's not doing that to be awkward for visiting birders, but it's trying to stop itself from being eaten by any passing golden eagle. But it doesn't make it easy. Fortunately, the birds molt out at their winter plumage, in theory, timing it as the snow melts, and they come into this sort of browner plumage instead, and eventually they lose all the white and becomes brown all over, which again causes problems. My friend who took this picture assures me that there are several ptarmigan in this shot. Now, if there are, I've been looking at this for the last 15 plus years and I haven't found any yet. And if you think ptarmigan were hard to see, here's a picture of a spotted crake. This is Inchmarsh's RSPB reserve, and it's an absolutely magnificent wetlands. It's sort of a floodplain for the River Spey, but it's brilliant for breeding waders, snipe and redshanks and lapwings and what have you. And spotted redshanks breed there most years. And they know that because they start calling about 10 o'clock at night in May, quip, 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 quip. And this goes on till about 4 o'clock in the morning, quip, 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 quip. So we knew that the birds were there, but in all the time the reserve has been there, the warden has only ever seen one bird. When he flushed it from a path that he was walking through, it flew 10 yards down the path in front of him, disappeared into the undergrowth, and that's the only visual record that exists for the reserve. If you want to know what it should look like, beautiful little bird. We tend to see them not quite as spotty as that. We get juveniles turning up on passage, usually down the east coast. Golden eagles, one of the target birds for every birder who goes up to Scotland. Magnificent to see them. They have huge territories, anything up to 80 square miles. And it doesn't take a lot of thought to think, I'm looking at the ridge in front of me, and he's doing somersaults behind me, and he's going to disappear just as soon as I turn around, and I'll never see him again. Huge territories, it's not easy to find them. If you want to see seabirds such as storm petrels or Pomeranian skuas, you need a very precise set of weather conditions to bring them close inshore. If you want to see a dotterel or a snow bunting, you're going to have to climb a mountain, and a pretty high mountain at that. And one of the problems with global warming is that as the snow line retreats, and last autumn they actually had, I think only the second or third time on record, no snow at all on any of the Scottish mountain tops. So there's going to be a range contraction for ptarmigan and snow buntings and dotterel. Then there are all the rare birds that breed up in Scotland. Not every year, but sometimes 1 or 2 pairs, sometimes half a dozen, but never very many. Here we've got towing stints, wrynecks, blue throats, redback shrikes, wood sandpipers, strawlarks, foreign rose finches. They all breed on and off. Could be a gap of 10 years between breeding records, but no way on earth I could put anything like that into the book. A, because of the amount of pressure we put on the bird, and we know that the welfare of the bird must come first. But say I could write it there and say, well, it was there in 2014. That doesn't mean say it's going to be there in 15, 16, 17, 18, whenever people are using the book. So that was something else that I didn't want to mention. Again, I don't particularly like it in other where to watch guides where authors put in historical records. oh, back in 1983, there was such and such rare wader seen. Well, so what? I want to know what I can see when I go today. Hen harriers, male hen harriers, got to be one of my all-time favourite birds. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, they undergo very heavy persecution. And the problem here was a slightly different one. It wasn't so much putting in sites where you might see them, but mentioning sites where you don't or can't or no longer can actually see them because they've been persecuted. And the publishers, and to some extent myself, didn't really want to be sued by any very rich landowners because there's no way on earth we could have defended ourselves. They just throw more money at it than we've got. So we had to come up with a form of words, something along the lines of, there are hen harriers in the area, but perhaps not in the density you might have expected, which is basically a get out of jail free term for the fact that, yes, there should be hen harriers there and there aren't anymore. I was talking to one field worker over on Deeside, and he said when he first started, he had between 15 and 20 pairs of hen harriers just on his small patch. Hasn't seen one for the last 10 years. And there are all the other birds that people go up to Scotland to see: ospreys, white-tailed eagles, my favourite wader, greenshanks, absolutely stunning red-throated diver. Get them in Norfolk, but only in winter plumage. You see them with the sun glinting off that red throat. They're fantastic birds to see. Even more stunning black-throated divers, like something straight out of a Parisian fashion house. And we want to see these, but the birds are scarce up there, and they are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. They're offered Schedule 1 protection, which means that it's illegal to disturb them at or near the nest, which makes it a problem for me. If I want to say, go to this loch and look for divers, there's only one loch in the area, so you've got a fair idea where they are, but you've got to try and find a way where you can watch them safely without actually disturbing them. In Lochingdorp, we talked about earlier, well, the Wolf of Badenoch had his castle there. There are divers on there, but they often fall foul to disturbance from the fishermen. One year, the young got tangled in fishing line and had to be put down. So disturbance is a real problem and something that we have to be aware of. Black grouse, close relation to the capercaillie we saw earlier, and they, like the capercaillie, they have communal areas called leks, where the males come down and display with a bit of dad dancing as they try to impress the females. And it's wonderful. You get a collection of pops and squeaks and whistles and croaks and groans, and they're strutting their stuff. And of course, it's illegal under the Wildlife and Countryside Act to disturb birds at or near a lek. So now another problem we like to put. So again, it seems like you might see black grouse in the area. Well, yes, you might, because there's a fair chance you'll get them lecking if you're out at dawn. I'm not going to tell you exactly where the lek is because I do not want people going up and basically destroying that year's breeding season. Crossbills. This is a common crossbill, a relatively small bill, slightly bigger bill. It's a Scottish crossbill, if it exists at all, and some experts don't believe it does. And this is a parrot crossbill, which has a stonking great bill. And it used to be easy because there only used to be so-called Scottish crossbills up in the Highlands, but then the common crossbills moved in, and then the parrot crossbills came over from Scandinavia. And one of the problems with them is that there is a huge overlap in bill size. So a large common crossbill will overlap with a small Scottish crossbill, and a large Scottish crossbill will overlap with a small parrot crossbill. So you can't just go on bill size to see what you think you might be looking at. It was then decided that Scottish crossbills have a particular type of call, And if you took tape recordings and analysed the sonograms, you could determine whether it was in fact a Scottish crossbill or not. But they've now shown that that doesn't hold water either. And so the Scottish Records Committee is now no longer taking any records of Scottish crossbills in the field. You're okay if you report common crossbills, and you're okay if you report really big parrot crossbills. But unless you have got DNA evidence to the contrary, there are no more Scottish crossbill records being accepted. So you go out birding for a day, take your packed lunch, take your binoculars and take your DNA testing kit. It's the only way you're going to get around it. Logistical nightmares. The book covers a vast area, and I mean vast. The whole of the Highland, Skye, all of Moray, most of Aberdeenshire, the top half of Perth and Kinross, and Mull. And as I say, it's almost like one giant nature reserve. Wherever you drive around, you might see something of interest. And because of that, parking becomes a real problem. Well, you can drive anywhere and stop anywhere. For a book like a Where to Watch guide, you have to get people to the right place so that they know that they are starting where you want them to start. It's no good saying, drive down this single track road and look for the 23rd passing place on the left-hand side. That's just not going to cut it. Fortunately, the whole of the Highlands is dripping with archaeology. This is a broch near Glenelg over on the west coast, built about anything up to 5,000 years ago. I rather suspect my house is not going to look that good in 5,000 years' time. Again, up in Caithness, this is the Hill of Many Stains. You've just got these rows and rows of small rocks, all in straight lines, just fanning out slightly. Again, probably about 5,000 years old, but nobody knows who put them there, or what they were there for. It reminded me when I went as if somebody had planted a load of pebbles as seeds 5,000 years ago, and that's how much they've grown in the intervening years. But the thing about these archaeological sites is that they are well signposted, and there are car parks signposted, and you can take people there and they know they're in the right place. It might not be quite position A for the bird watching you want to show them, but at least they know they're there and they're starting off in the right place, and you can hold them by the hand and take them where you want to go from that. And I'll let you into a secret here. It doesn't matter what birds you write about. I could have pterosaurs gliding over the cliffs. I could have herds of emu wandering over the moorside. And if people didn't see them, that's fine. That's birding. It's one of those things. You didn't see it, you come back another day. But as soon as you get the car parking sign wrong, oh boy, do the Green Ink Brigade let you know about it. When the first edition of the book came out, I got an email from a very angry customer. Dear sir, you said the car park was on the left, it was on the right, you completely ruined my holiday. Okay, fair enough, sorry about that. And it was only a couple of weeks later that I realised he'd actually been doing the tour in reverse. So of course the flipping car park was on the other side of the road. I just wish I'd thought of it at the time he was having a go at me. This is Inverpolly up in northwest Scotland, and as you can see, it's magnificent. Problem is, Inverpolly is massive, and I mean massive. I mean, they're probably bigger than a lot of small English counties. And if I said to you, go to Rutland and you can see tree sparrows, you think, well, yeah, it's accurate, but it's not really very helpful. And a lot of the books that have existed on Where to Watch sites say, go to Inverpolly, you'll see black-throated diver, red-throated diver, green-shanked golden eagle, blah, blah, blah. But they give you no help at all as to where within this vast area you might actually encounter these wonderful birds. So that's something else I had to think about. It's not enough just to take them to the right area. You've got to be very specific and take them to exactly the right spot. Inverpolly used to be a national nature reserve, but the landowners, the Vesties, who owned Spam, amongst other things, had a massive falling out with the Scottish equivalent of English nature, Scottish National Heritage, and as a result, it's no longer a national nature reserve, and management practices have, I'm afraid, gone to pot as they're more interested in pursuits, hunting, shooting, fishing that will generate income for the landowners. We were driving along near Loch Ness one day, and a golden eagle came over the Brava Hill, being pursued and mobbed by ravens and buzzards and so on and so forth. And as it happens, we were driving past a small loch, and there's a great big lay-by there. And I thought, we pulled into the lay-by, got all our stuff out, we watched the eagle for the next 15, 20 minutes. I thought, well, this would be a good place for the book. We've got fantastic scenery, we've got moorland, we've got the loch we talked about earlier, there's some woodland there, we know it's good for raptors. I thought, yeah, I could put this in one of the tools. And we turned around to put our scopes back in the boot of the car, and there was a pair of Slavonian grebes in their wonderful yellow fright wigs, just swimming quite casually by our feet, right at the edge of the loch, not in the least bit bothered. But Slavonian grebes are Schedule 1 protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And again, there's no way I could start taking people there thinking of the amount of disturbance that was going to cause them. So that was another site we had to take out. And this happened a few times. I had a great place for watching the sea over on the west coast. Seabirds galore, chances of whales and dolphins, absolutely brilliant, apart from the fact that there were peregrines nesting on the cliff behind. And again, it wouldn't be right to cause them undue disturbance. So that was another one that had to be struck off. Gaelic caused me no end of problems. It's a beautiful language. The poetry, the songs are wonderful, but it's very much an oral language. It was never designed to be written down. And you know, at some stage, you're going to meet somebody and do the usual thing of, what have you seen? And he's going to be swearing Gaelic. And you start getting cocky after a bit. You think, I'm English, I can do this. And you think, Kyle Loch Alf. Yeah, I can see that, Kyle Loch Alf. Inver means, oh, B's pronounced as a V, is it right? Inver Morriston. Inver Ness. Ah, it's easy, this Gaelic thing. And then you come to the fourth one. And you now have two options. You say to the other person, yeah, we've just seen this thing, or where was it? And you can either pronounce it as it's written, and you know that's going to be wrong. It's not Drochade and Eileen Gideonage. Or you can think, oh, I've learned a bit of Gaelic, I'll have a go. Drochade and Eileen Skianach. Neither of those are remotely correct. So if you have problems with Gaelic while you're up there, always take option 3. Let's say, just a minute, I'll go and get the map and I'll show you. It's a lot easier to point than pronounce. And to give you some idea of some of the problems we had, there's a car park on the route up to Cairngorm Mountain top called More. And it's very good for crested tits and grey wagtails and dippers along the burn there. But in all the different maps I looked at, More was spelt variously: M-H-O-R, M-O-R, M-O-O-R, M-O-R-E, M-O-A-R, M-H-O-A-R, M-O-O-A-R. And there was no guarantee either that both parts of the word were spelt the same way. So you had any number of possibilities of what this thing looked like. And you just want one definitive form to put down in the book. You can't list all 49 alternatives and say it'll be one of these. You just have to go with one. And I usually just went with the one on the Ordnance Survey map, more. And if anybody had other maps that showed these, well, hopefully they'd be able to work it out. As it happens, it was totally and utterly irrelevant. Not long after the book came out, the car park closed. And again, this is a sort of occupational hazard that you have to put up with. This is Craig Ellerkey in Aviemore, beautiful bit of woodland. Spring is one of the few places up north where you can get good views of pied flycatchers and wood warblers especially. And I gave perfect descriptions from the tourist office in Aviemore, just 100 yards, so down the road, do this, walk here, and there it is. Again, the book came out and the tourist office relocated to the other end of town. Nothing whatsoever you can do. There's Rouray Lighthouse over on the west coast, north of Gairloch. And this has been problematical for a long time. I was dealing with the old owners and they weren't too happy about people going there. Great place for watching whales and dolphins, as well as seagulls and all the seabirds. And I was writing to them backwards and forwards, offering one form of words. Do you like that? I'm not, can you take that sentence out? Can you change that? So we'd change it and go back again. And eventually we came up with a form of words that they were happy to put in. And again, just all ready to go, and they sold the place. And unfortunately, the person they sold it to didn't want people there at all, despite the fact you've got open access in Scotland. And there were all sorts of running battles between the locals and the owners here, and it got very, very nasty indeed, to the extent I was still getting nasty emails about it a few months ago. But she's now decided to leave, and I say hopefully, we'll work out how far you can drive up the road, where they want you to stop and what have you. But these things are sent to try you, and I say it's annoying, but you just have to grin and bear it. How dangerous is bird watching? Well, obviously not very dangerous at all, but we did have our fair share of adventures along the way. This is the church at Crimmond. It's between Aberdeen and Peterhead, and it's the starting place for the wonderful Loch of Strathbeg RSPB Reserve. And you get the sense that something's wrong when you take a closer look at the place. And it's actually got 61 minutes on the clock. It has 6 minutes between 11 and 12. And that should act as a warning that maybe things aren't quite as they seem. The reserve itself is a fantastic wetlands because of its geographical location, bit that sticks right out at the top of Aberdeenshire. It gets all sorts of rare birds. They've had things like petrel sandpipers, cranes, little gulls have all attempted breeding over the years. Greater yellowlegs are too. Well, it's just a really nice place to go and explore. And that's fine if you just want to stick to the wetlands. But if you want to go to the loch itself, you have to retrace your steps to the main road, drive down through the village, and it then takes you over this disused airfield out to the loch. And I say disused airfield, you can see by all the masts here that they are very probably listening to me as I'm giving this talk at the moment. It's obviously a very secure monitoring site for who knows what. And you are directed in a very specific manner. You go follow the route to get down to the heights. You must not deviate on pain of death or whatever. And so we follow the road round. That's okay. It takes you, winds you round all these disused runways and what have you. And eventually we get to the heights, and we were sitting there, and there were a few barnacle geese moving through, ready to head off back north. Ditto, some hooper swans, very late, middle of May, but ready to get back up to Iceland. And it was a lovely day, and eventually we had our fill of the hides. Got back into the car, windows wound down because the grass over the airfield was crawling with wheatears and skylarks and meadow pipits, and the whole place was full of song. And we traced our steps back across the runway, following the route they wanted, not deviating slightest. And we turned a corner, bang! A petrol bomb, a Molotov cocktail. See, I told you there were Molotovs, exploded in front of us. To the left of the runway, there were police in full riot gear, rhythmically beating their batons against their shields. You've seen the film Zulu, you see when Swear's armies crest the top of the hill and they're using their spears against the shields. Dum, 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 just like that. On the other side of the runway, we got the rioters lobbing half bricks, Molotov cocktails, and insults at the police. Of course, it's all a training exercise, but it was quite scary for all of that. Not used to being firebombed in Scotland. And they see us coming, and the command goes up, "Stop rioting!" They stop, they all walk a couple of paces backwards, and they waved us through, got out to the other side of it, and then we could hear the command go up again, "Commence rioting!" We went starting again. This is Glen Lyon, described by Sir Walter Scott as the longest, loneliest, and loveliest glen in Scotland. And it's certainly the longest. It goes about 20 miles into the hinterland, nothing anywhere near it apart from the hydroelectric scheme right at the very end of the road. And we were driving down, scanning it out, seeing whether it would be good enough to include in the book. It was. And as we got to the end of the road, there were some flash guns going off. And you could see from the intensity of them that they were obviously professional flash guns. This wasn't mum and dad taking pictures of little Johnny with the Instamatic on holiday. And immediately started thinking, who would be 20 miles away from anybody else filming? And being a man, because this is the way men's minds work, I decided it had to be a porn film. And you then start thinking, well, if it is a porn film, what do I do? Where do I point the telescope? Or do I just do the British thing and pretend that we haven't seen them? And of course, it wasn't a porn film. I was being stupid. It was, in fact, Italian Vogue magazine, and they were doing a shoot for handbags costing several £1,000s. And we got out and we set up our scopes, and they got interested. They wanted to know what they were. Could they have a look through them? Yes, of course you can. And we were showing them dippers, a pair feeding young underneath a bridge there, and peregrines sailing gaily over our heads. They enjoyed what we see. They'd never used a telescope before, and what have you. And they went off and they had a little conflab. And they came back and they said, in sort of broken Italian English, "We're shooting pictures for this handbag, and we think there is one thing that we think would help sell these handbags to the Italians. You." Well, what can I say? Would I mind being in the pictures? Not in the slightest. What do they say about supermodels? If I get out of bed for less than 10 grand a day, I could imagine going into the Hyde at Lock Garden, Pink Moss on one arm, Naomi Campbell on the other. I thought, yeah, I'll get used to this. So they went off to get their cameras, and I started practicing my pouts and my poses. And they came back and they got set up, and they said, right, stand here, do that, press the button. There was an electrical short, all the batteries went, their cameras blew up or refused to work or whatever. And that was it. My career as a supermodel ended immediately before it actually started. It's a bit of a disappointment. This is Findhorn Valley, although the name's not strictly correct. There are no valleys in Scotland. You either have straths, which are sort of fairly shallow-sided, or you have glens, which are steep, more of a V shape rather than a U shape. And so this is correctly known as Strathdurn but it follows the River Findhorn, and most people I know still call it Findhorn Valley. And this is the Valley of Death, the Valley of Raptors, call it what you want. It's a brilliant place to go and watch birds of prey. You have the chance of golden eagle, white-tailed eagle, king harrier, osprey, red kite, buzzard, sparrowhawk, goshawk, peregrine, merlin and kestrel, all within the space of a morning, if you're really lucky. We were down there one March, and I was scanning around, and eventually I picked up distant bird, black and white, flappy wings. I shouted to Chris, quick, quick, I've got the first osprey of the year. So she turns around from where she is, brings a scope over, and we start getting onto it. Unfortunately, what was one bird has now turned into a flock of 30. Now, I might not be the best bird watcher in the world, but I'm pretty sure that I wasn't looking at a flock of 30 ospreys. And sure enough, they were lapwings, which, to be fair, at that distance, they're black and white with round, floppy wings as they fly. But I thought, that's it, I've had enough. Come on, let's go home. So off we trot. Oh, we'd just driven off, and I then heard those words that strike fear and trembling into the hearts of every man here tonight. I need to go to the toilet. Okay, so we stop the car, and you then play the game. Is it safe to go yet? I look down the valley. A mile one way, there's a red stag vaguely eyeing us up. Half a mile the other way down the valley, there's a buzzard hanging over one of the cliffs. For goodness sake, woman, get a move on, will you? You could have been a dozen times by now. And eventually Chris scuttles off into the heather and squats down. From out of nowhere, an RAF tornado screamed over at 100 feet. All I could see was Chris, showing great presence of mind, pulling her woolen hat down over her face. As she explained to me later, they can take as many pictures of my bum as they like, but so long as they can't see my face, I don't mind. But if you have been to RAF Kinloss or Lucas or any of the other bases around there, you've been into the officers' mess, and there is a picture of a middle-aged woman mooning at the pilot, I can only apologise, it's my wife. Fame and fortune, everybody wants to know, do you make a lot of money out of your books? After all, as Dr. Johnson said, no man but a blockhead ever wrote except for money. Well, no, is the short answer to that. I make about 80 pence in royalties for every copy that is sold. Put that into context, I mentioned the Grant Arms earlier, where I do a lot of work. They stock the book on their bookshelves there, and if they sell a copy, they make about £6 from it, which doesn't seem quite fair somehow, but that's the way of the world. So if anyone asks you, can you make money from books? Yes, but only by selling somebody else's. But the glorious day arrives, and your book finally arrives. There's a knock on the door, there's the postman with a box that you take out and you have a look, you ignore this print that you just found on it as you open it. And I cannot tell a lie, your head does swell with pride. And sure enough, the next Saturday sees me straight down to Clyde Marshes and the visitor centre there, and there's the book on the shelf. And yes, you feel great. And you carefully maneuver it so you hide all your rivals' books and make sure yours is in the best possible position. And I went and stood next to the shelf thinking, if anybody comes and picks up a copy, I'll say, would you like me to sign that for you? After 15 minutes, nobody had even come into the shop. So I thought, plan B. So I went up to the shop assistant and said, I see you've got my new book on your shelf. Would you like me to sign a few copies for you? Oh no, she said, we don't do that here. I said, why not? She said, well, a few months ago we had, and here she named an author well above me in terms of fame and what have you. And he came and he signed some of these books. And one of the locals came in, picked it up off the shelves and said, "Oh, I don't want this. Some bugger's written in it." So, yes, the swollen head was very quickly deflated. I've got a stalker. When the first edition came out, I got an email from somebody and said, "We're just going up to Scotland. Your book was the first thing I packed in the car." I thought, well, that's sweet. Okay, and it's not true, but it's very nice of you to say so. Thank you very much. The next bit got a bit more sinister. "I didn't really need to pack it. I know it off by heart." And you think, ugh, I don't like the sound of this. And I started getting nightmares when we were both appearing on Mastermind, answering questions about my book, and he was getting more right than I was. Everybody who buys the book owns a little bit of your soul. And you have to remember that, and you have to try and be nice to them, no matter how much they provoke you. Let's leave it at that. I was in the hide at Udale Bay on the Cromarty Firth, lovely RSPB reserve. Loads of pink-footed geese there. They used as a staging post. And there was a woman in the hide with us, and she got a copy of the book. We got talking, and she said nice things about it. It was very nice, and what have you. And it was the time that that volcano in Iceland was erupting massively. Now there's its name there. I pronounce it Eyjafjallajökull, and I know that's not right, and I apologise if your Icelandic's any better than mine, but that's as good as you're going to get. But it was all over the news, and that morning the government had just announced that because of all the ash and the fallout that was in the sky, they were grounding all the planes. And I mentioned this to the woman. And she turned to me and said, "That's disgusting. Why have they grounded all the planes and they haven't grounded all the geese?" Now, there are a lot of things you want to say at this stage, nearly all of them rude. And I thought, well, I'll give her a few seconds just to see if she realises what she said. No, she didn't. So I've now got to try and come up with an excuse as to why the government haven't somehow magically managed to stop all the geese from migrating away. So I invented a special third eyelid that they have got that they can see through, a see-through membrane, and that keeps all the ashes out of their eyes. And I pointed out that their breeding grounds are behind the volcano. With the winds in the prevailing direction, they wouldn't have any problem there. She seemed quite happy with that, and I thought, well, I can't be bothered making anything else up, so I changed the subject very quickly. But you have to remember, she's bought the book, it will be nice. I have been recognised. This is a pea field in the middle of Norfolk, and the day before there had been some dotterel moving through. They seem to like pea fields, especially for some reason. And we got there early in the morning, and there wasn't a sign of them. They'd obviously skedaddled overnight. But there was another bird there. And as you do, you get talking. "Have you seen them?" "No, I think they've gone." "Yes, they've gone." And he turns around to me and says, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you just written a book about Scotland?" And I said, "Yes, I have." "How could you possibly know that?" He said, "Well, it's a funny story." He said, "I was up in Scotland. I'd gone down to the bar that night, and I was flicking through your book, and there was another couple at the bar, and they also had a copy of your book. And we got talking, and they said, 'Oh, yes, look, Artie's friend. We know the author very well.' And they had obviously described me to this stranger, and he had decided that there couldn't possibly be two people in Norfolk who looked that stupid, and so he'd taken a punt on that. I was sea watching up at Clyde, and a voice boomed out behind me. 'Last time I saw you, we were watching eagles up on Skye. I recognise your sandals.' Well, I thought that was a bit of a backhanded compliment, not least because the sandals were brand new and he couldn't possibly have seen them before. But as we sail off into the sunset, this is the Merlins on the west coast, I thought that just about sums up my career as an author. It doesn't matter what I do now. I could win Pulitzer Prizes for my books. I could even win the Nobel Prize for literature. But no, whatever happens in my life, I'm going to be remembered as the man who was recognized by the wrong sandals. Thank you very much.